A city of black volcanic stone rises from a turquoise lagoon. This is Nan Madol, an ancient metropolis built entirely on top of a living coral reef. Explorer Paul Theroux called it a place of utter mystery, and for good reason. By the end of this journey, you will understand how this forgotten capital redefines the limits of human ingenuity in one of the most isolated places on Earth. How did its builders move 750,000 tons of stone without metal or wheels? And why would a powerful dynasty choose to construct their seat of power upon a foundation of shifting coral? This is a story of megalithic engineering, spiritual ambition, and a civilization that reached for the divine before vanishing into the jungle. What does it mean to build an empire on water? From the open ocean, the first glimpse is a shock of geometry. A grid of dark, angular forms breaks the endless blue of the Pacific, a stark silhouette against the shimmering turquoise of a protected lagoon. This is Pohnpei, a high volcanic island draped in emerald jungle, and cradled within its reef lies the impossible city. To approach by boat is to witness a profound contradiction, a human world of straight lines and right angles imposed upon the soft, curving shapes of a coral paradise. We are in the Federated States of Micronesia, a scattering of islands so remote they feel like the end of the map. And here, on the eastern shore of Pohnpei, ancient builders performed a feat that still defies easy explanation. They did not build on the solid, forgiving earth of the mainland. Instead, they chose the water itself. Nan Madol is not a city on land, but an artificial archipelago, a network of 92 individual islets painstakingly constructed atop a living coral reef. For nearly 500 years, from around the year 1100 to 1600 AD, this was the beating heart of an island empire. It served as the sacred ceremonial and political seat of the Saudeleur Dynasty, a line of rulers whose name translates to Lord of Delor, hinting at a period of centralized power unlike anything the region had known before. Think of the sheer improbability. In an era before global maps, before steel tools, a society on this isolated island decided their capital would not be on the stable, fertile ground. It would be on the water, a place of tides and currents, requiring a foundation to be built from nothing. The city itself is divided into two distinct districts, each with a solemn purpose. To the northeast lies Madol Pa, the city of the dead, a quiet sector of islets reserved for mortuary rites and the resting places of the elite. To the southwest sits Madol Pao, the city of the living, the administrative hub where the business of rule, ceremony, and daily life for the nobility unfolded. This basic layout poses the first great question, the one that pulls us deeper into the mystery. Why would a rising power choose such a difficult, unstable place to plant its flag? The answer begins not with grand plans, but with the very stones they used to realize them. The cool, porous surface of a basalt log would have felt like the skin of a giant under a builder's hand. These are not ordinary stones, they are prismatic columns, each one a geometric marvel formed by ancient volcanic fire, now weighing several tons and stacked like colossal timber. The first and most tangible mystery of Nan Madol is not just its design, but its very substance. Where did the estimated 750,000 metric tons of rock come from? And how did it cross miles of land and sea to reach this isolated reef? Archaeologists have identified two main types of basalt in the city's skeleton. The most iconic are the columnar basalt logs, quarried from a volcanic plug on the opposite side of Pohnpei Island, a place now known as Sorcerer. The other is boulder basalt, gathered from various coastal outcrops. Surveys have mapped these quarry sites, but the path between them and the finished city remains a blank space on the map, filled only with theory and legend. The logistics are a staggering puzzle. Imagine moving a stone column weighing as much as 2 large elephants across several miles of rugged jungle terrain, then transferring it onto rafts or barges for a voyage across open ocean water, navigating through narrow mangrove channels, and finally lifting and placing it with precision onto an unstable foundation of coral rubble. It is a feat often compared to the construction of the pyramids, but with a critical difference: the builders of Nan Madol had to achieve this on a base that shifted with the tides. The prevailing theory suggests a system of rafts and ropes, perhaps using the buoyancy of the lagoon itself during high tide to float the stones into position. Local oral history, however, speaks of a different kind of magic. Legends tell of 2 powerful brothers, Olisipa and Olosopa, the first Saudeleur rulers, who used a sacred chant to make the stones fly through the air from their quarries to the reef. While we may interpret this as myth, the story underscores a profound truth. The effort was so monumental, so beyond ordinary human capability, that it demanded a supernatural explanation. So what does this immense, generations-long labor tell us about the Saudeleur? It speaks of a will that bordered on obsession, a power so absolute it could command the very landscape to be rearranged. This stone puzzle, however, is only half the story. The foundation upon which these megaliths rest is a miracle of a different kind. Dive beneath the surface of that calm lagoon, and the true scale of the ambition comes into focus. The black basalt walls we see from above are merely the visible crown of a submerged kingdom. Below the waterline, the ancient engineers did not fight the reef, they partnered with it. They used massive coral heads, natural pillars formed over centuries, as the living bedrock for their artificial islands. Around these organic piers, they constructed cribs of basalt boulders, locking the vibrant coral into a rigid, geometric embrace. This is the second, perhaps more profound, mystery of Nan Madol. How do you build a stable, monumental city on a foundation that is itself alive, growing, and constantly reshaped by the sea? The solution was a technique of breathtaking audacity. The builders identified shallow tidal channels crisscrossing the reef flat. Into these waterways, they poured countless tons of coral rubble, manually harvested from the surrounding reef, to create raised platforms above the high tide line. These platforms became the islets. Then, to hold this loose fill in place against the relentless push and pull of the ocean, they erected those formidable retaining walls, the stacked basalt columns and boulders that give the city its stark silhouette. Geoarchaeologists studying the site point to a staggering array of challenges the builders had to overcome. Tidal forces would have constantly threatened to wash away the unconsolidated rubble. Storm surges from Pacific typhoons could have shattered walls and scoured out canals. Even the biology of the reef itself, the slow but persistent growth of new coral and the boring of countless marine organisms, a process called bioerosion, would have worked to undermine the stonework over time. The in-depth analysis reveals a sophisticated form of reef engineering. This was not a brute force imposition, but a nuanced dialogue with the environment. The network of canals that served as the city's streets also functioned as a managed hydrological system. Researchers believe complex tidal gates, perhaps made of wood or more stone, once controlled the flow of water through the city, allowing for drainage, preventing stagnation, and possibly even regulating the movement of ceremonial canoes. An illustrative case study shows that while similar reef-top structures exist across the Pacific, from the coral churches of the Solomon Islands to smaller chiefly enclosures, none approach the scale or complexity of Nan Madol. It stands alone, a megalithic capital on a coral canvas. This leads to a reflective question for us today. What depth of environmental knowledge, what intimate understanding of tides, coral growth, and storm patterns was possessed by these islanders, and how much of that precise science was lost when their civilization faded? To answer that, we must finally step onto the dry stones of the islets themselves and meet the society that demanded such a feat. The legend begins not with a king, but with a storm. Oral histories tell of two brothers, Olasipa and Olasopa, who arrived from a distant land, perhaps Khosri to the east, in a great canoe. They were not ordinary men, but powerful sorcerers, and they sought a place to build an altar to their gods. Their first attempts on the main island failed, their structures washed away by the sea or the spirits, but here on this reef they found their purpose. Using a sacred chant, they commanded the massive basalt logs to fly through the air from their quarries, assembling the first islets with supernatural ease. This founding myth of magical flight is more than a fanciful tale. It is a cultural memory encoding a profound truth. The construction of Nan Madol was so phenomenally difficult that it seemed, even to those who accomplished it, to be the work of gods. From these mythical twins emerged the very real Saudeleur Dynasty, a name meaning Lord of Delor, which translates to Lord of the surrounding land. For roughly 4 centuries, this dynasty achieved what was likely Pohnpei's first centralized, island-wide government. Their power was absolute and hierarchical, a stark shift from the more decentralized clan systems of the past. Nan Madol was the ultimate expression of this new order. It was not merely a capital, it was a political and religious tool of breathtaking scale, designed to concentrate power and demonstrate a divine mandate. By placing their seat of authority on an artificial island, separate from the fertile land where commoners farmed, the Saudeleur created a physical and spiritual divide. The city's imposing walls were not just for defense, they were a statement, a constant visual reminder of the unbridgeable gap between the sacred rulers and the people they governed. This system was sustained by a rigorous tribute economy, detailed in ethno-historical accounts recorded by early researchers. Every clan on Pohnpei was assigned a specific duty, providing food, crafted goods, or labor directly to the Saudeleur court at Nan Madol. The entire island essentially worked to feed and maintain this isolated elite. Consider the central islet of Pohnpei, the ritual heart of the dynasty. Here, within a walled compound, the highest priests and perhaps the Saudeleur himself performed ceremonies meant to ensure the island's fertility and the dynasty's continuity. It was a place of immense spiritual power, yet also a symbol of profound isolation. The rulers lived in a city of stone and water, surrounded by the bounty of the sea, yet utterly dependent on the mainland for sustenance. This leads to a compelling paradox. Was Nan Madol a glorious capital celebrating a pinnacle of civilization, or was it, in a sense, a gilded prison? Its rulers commanded the landscape, but they were also trapped by it, walled off from the very society their power rested upon. The immense workforce required, spanning generations, speaks to a social organization of remarkable control. The dynasty's timeline, from its mythical rise to its eventual peak, represents a long experiment in absolute authority, an experiment that would not last forever. Its dramatic, myth-shrouded fall would be as instructive as its rise. Vines now creep through the silent seams of the great walls, and mangrove roots slowly pry apart foundations laid centuries ago. The canals, once bustling with ceremonial canoes, are still and dark, reflecting only the jungle's relentless advance. This atmosphere of profound quiet is not the peace of a place resting, but the stillness that follows a sudden, definitive end. The story of Nan Madol's abandonment is as dramatic as its construction, a pivotal turning point etched into the very memory of Pohnpei. Around the year 1628, the absolute rule of the Saudeleur dynasty was shattered by a single figure, the warrior hero Isohkelekel. His name means thunder or resounding fame, and his arrival from the island of Khosri marked a revolution. This was not merely a change in leadership, it was a complete overturning of a social order. The centralized, tribute-driven state collapsed, and Pohnpei returned to a system of decentralized chiefdoms, a structure that would define the island for centuries to come. The causes of this fall were both internal and external, a slow burn of resentment meeting the spark of invasion. For generations, the common people had borne the weight of the Saudeleurs' demands, providing endless tribute to sustain the isolated elite in their stone city on the water. Oral histories speak of growing oppression, a power so concentrated it became brittle. The dynasty's very success in walling itself off created a fatal disconnect, making the rulers seem less like divine protectors and more like distant overlords. Into this simmering discontent sailed Isohkelekel. Legends say he was of Pohnpeian descent, returning from exile in Kosri with a band of warriors to reclaim his homeland. The final confrontation is recounted in epic detail. The Saudeleur ruler, isolated in his aquatic capital, was ultimately defeated. Some stories tell of his flight into the mountains, where he was transformed into a fish or simply vanished, his direct line of rule extinguished forever. An in-depth explanation of this collapse reveals the inherent fragility of such an absolute system. A power structure built entirely upon control and extraction, with no meaningful connection to the land and people it governed, contained the seeds of its own downfall. Its legitimacy relied on perpetual demonstration, on walls so high and rituals so remote that they eventually inspired not awe but rebellion. The aftermath was swift and complete. With the Saudeleur gone, the reason for Nan Madol's existence evaporated overnight. The complex was abandoned as a political and administrative center. The canals fell silent, the great feast halls emptied, and the stones began their long conversation with the jungle. Yet the city did not fade into mere ruin. It underwent a powerful transformation, becoming a sacred and deeply feared necropolis, a city of spirits. For generations, Pohnpeians viewed the overgrown islets not as a historical site, but as a place of potent and dangerous magic. An illustrative anecdote from modern times tells of local fishermen who would avoid certain canals, speaking of uneasy feelings and a tradition that discourages entering the city after dark, a superstition that lingers as a ghost of the past's profound spiritual weight. This leads to a reflective question that echoes beyond these shores. Does the fate of Nan Madol offer a universal lesson about the limits of absolute power? It stands as a monument to what humanity can achieve through collective will, and a silent testament to what can be lost when that will becomes too detached from the world it seeks to command. The city's physical legacy, however, crafted from coral and basalt, outlasted the rulers who built it. From above, Nan Madol reveals itself as a deliberate geometric puzzle. A precise grid of dark stone platforms is neatly separated by shimmering canals of seawater, a stark contrast to the wild, organic curves of the jungle and reef that surround it. This was not a haphazard collection of buildings, it was a meticulously planned city with a clear urban blueprint, a physical manifestation of a highly structured society. The layout itself is a map to understanding the Saudeleur world, where every stone, every canal, and every islet served a specific purpose in a grand design of power and ritual. The city is fundamentally divided into two great districts, each with a name that speaks to its core function. To the northeast lies Madol Pa, translated as the place of the dead. This quieter, more secluded sector was dedicated entirely to the realm of the ancestors and the spirit world. Its islets house imposing mortuary enclosures where the elite of the dynasty were laid to rest in ceremonies meant to honor their passage and secure their legacy. The atmosphere here is one of solemn reverence, a city within a city designed for eternal memory. Across the main channel to the southwest is Madol Pao, the place of the temples. This was the bustling heart of the living city, the administrative and ceremonial core where the business of rule, grand public rituals, and the daily life of the nobility unfolded. It was here that the Saudeleur's temporal and spiritual authority was most visibly performed. This strict zoning, separating the sacred necropolis from the active political center, reveals a society with a complex hierarchical worldview. It physically enforced social boundaries, ensuring that the powerful rituals of death and the dynamic activities of governance occupied distinct, specialized spaces. To walk its canals is to take a tour through a stratified society frozen in stone. On the residential islets like Pohnpei, we find evidence of daily life for the priestly and noble classes. The construction here, while still impressive, is often more modest, using smaller boulders and a simpler stacking technique compared to the monumental architecture of the ceremonial centers. Archaeological site maps show clusters of foundation platforms that likely supported wooden longhouses built atop the stone foundations, structures that have long since returned to the earth. For a city entirely dependent on imported supplies, logistics were paramount. The islet of Idade, for example, is believed by researchers to have been a central food preparation area. The presence of large, flat stones suitable for grinding and cooking, along with its strategic location near a canal entrance, suggests it served as a communal kitchen, a vital hub where the tribute from the mainland was transformed into meals for the elite inhabitants. This practical need highlights the city's intricate support system, a constant flow of goods and labor required to sustain its isolated population. Perhaps the most awe-inspiring engineering feat is not a building but a barrier. Stretching along the seaward side of the city is the submerged seawall of Dorong. This massive, largely underwater rampart of basalt boulders was a first line of defense against the relentless power of the open Pacific. It functioned as a breakwater, absorbing the force of storm surges and ocean swells to protect the delicate canal network within, a testament to the builders' profound understanding of hydrodynamics and their determination to tame the sea itself. When we compare this spatial organization to other ancient ceremonial centers, from the ritual precincts of Mesoamerica to the temple complexes of Southeast Asia, a common thread emerges: the use of architecture to create a sacred geography, a mirror of the cosmos that reinforces social order. Nan Madol takes this concept a step further by building that sacred geography from scratch, not on a mountain or a plain, but on a manufactured landscape of coral and water. So what does this highly specialized urban design ultimately tell us about the people who conceived it? It reflects a world-view where every aspect of life and death had its designated place, where social hierarchy was not just believed but built into the very streets and walls. It speaks of a civilization capable of extraordinary long-term planning, where the function of a space was decided generations before the last stone was laid. And among all these functional islets, one complex rises above the rest, not just in physical height but in symbolic power, the tomb known as Nandauwas. The highest walls at Nan Madol do not guard a palace for the living, but a fortress for the dead. Nandauwas rises from the water with a solemn, intimidating presence, its outer walls towering 25 feet high and stretching 18 feet thick. This megalithic tomb complex represents the undisputed architectural apex of the entire city, the final resting place for the highest Saudeleur nobility and the site's most iconic and photographed structure. If the city itself was a statement of power, then Nandauwas was the exclamation point, a testament to the absolute zenith of the builders' engineering skill and their profound ritual ambition. To understand its construction is to grasp the peak of their craft. The tomb employs a brilliant double-wall technique, an inner and an outer wall, each meticulously built from those iconic prismatic basalt logs, were constructed with a gap between them. This cavity was then packed solid with coral rubble and smaller stones, creating a massive, stable core that could withstand both the test of time and the immense pressure from the surrounding lagoon. The precision here is staggering. Archaeological examinations note that some of these individual basalt columns weigh over 50 tons, yet they are fitted together with such care that the joints are remarkably tight, a puzzle of stone assembled without mortar. The layout within these formidable walls follows a sacred geometry, a central, enclosed crypt chamber where the most important individuals were laid to rest sits surrounded by a quiet courtyard. This open space is flanked by raised ceremonial platforms, suggesting a specific sequence of rituals where priests or mourners could gather to perform rites before the sealed inner sanctum. An in-depth analysis of this construction highlights a logistical puzzle that deepens the mystery. Building such a massive, heavy structure not on solid ground, but in the very center of an artificial reef, required foresight that borders on prophetic. Engineers today point out that the builders had to first ensure the underlying coral platform was stable enough to bear the immense weight, likely reinforcing it extensively before the first foundation stone was set. The entire process would have been a delicate ballet of buoyancy and balance, floating the heaviest stones into position at high tide with a margin for error that was essentially zero. An illustrative comparison shows how unique this achievement remains. While other Pacific cultures, like the Rapa Nui of Easter Island or the chiefs of Tonga, built impressive stone monuments, none created a multi-story, water-bound megalithic tomb of this scale and complexity. It stands in a category of its own. This leads to a reflective question that hangs in the humid air around the silent stones. What spiritual beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the legacy of power were so compelling that they demanded the investment of generations to create such a monumental final resting place? The sheer effort implies a worldview where the transition from ruler to ancestor was not an end, but a transformation of status that required a permanent, indestructible home. The tomb was likely designed not just to house physical remains, but to actively project the enduring authority of the dynasty into the spiritual realm, a declaration of power meant to echo for eternity. This staggering grandeur devoted to the dead, however, casts the challenges of the living into sharp relief, hinting at a society where immense resources were funneled toward the eternal, perhaps at the expense of the everyday. The canals of Nan Madol were not silent waterways, but the vital arteries of a living city. Picture the daily rhythm here, the soft splash of paddles as canoes glided between islets, carrying priests to their temples, administrators to their duties, and servants with baskets of food. The air would have carried the mingled scents of salt spray, cooking fires, and the sweet, earthy smell of breadfruit baking. This was not a vacant ceremonial site, but a densely populated capital, home to a permanent community of perhaps 1,000 people, all dedicated to maintaining the machinery of the Saudeleur state. This elite enclave included high priests, noble administrators, skilled craftspeople, and the many retainers needed to serve them. Their existence, however, was entirely dependent on a vast and relentless system of logistics. The stone city produced almost nothing it consumed. Every coconut, every taro root, every drop of fresh water beyond what could be caught in rain had to be brought in from the main island. This was achieved through a formalized tribute system, a cornerstone of Saudeleur power. Each clan district across Pohnpei was assigned a specific obligation, a weekly or monthly delivery of goods directly to the city's docks. Anthropological studies of similar Pacific chiefdoms suggest this would have included staple crops like yams and breadfruit, pigs and chickens, woven mats, ceremonial cover, and finely crafted tools. The canals functioned as loading docks where the bounty of the land was transferred to sustain the isolated elite on their artificial reefs. Daily life within the walls was shaped by this rigid hierarchy. Housing reflected status, with the highest nobles residing on islets with the most impressive stone foundations, their thatched longhouses built atop these platforms. Craftspeople, such as canoe builders or toolmakers, likely lived and worked in more modest quarters on designated islets. The diet was a mix of the imported and the local, supplemented by expert fishing within the protected lagoon and the harvest from small, sacred gardens that some islets might have maintained. One of the most critical challenges was freshwater. While some islets, like Pohnpei, have stone-lined wells that tapped into the lens of fresh water floating atop the saltwater within the porous coral, this supply was limited. Much of the city's drinking water was likely transported in bamboo tubes or coconut containers from springs on the main island, a constant and vital flow in the tribute network. Ceremony was the glue that held this intricate society together. We can imagine the grand feasts where the Saudeleur would redistribute some of the collected tribute in spectacular displays of generosity, a ritual that reinforced his divine role as the provider for all. The sound of chants and drumbeats from temple platforms like Pohnpei would have echoed across the water, a constant auditory reminder of the spiritual authority that legitimized the entire economic system. So we are left with a reflective question, one that asks us to look past the monumental stones to the people who lived among them. Was life in this lagoon city the ultimate privilege, a position within the inner circle of a divine order, or was it, in its own way, a form of servitude? Even the elite were bound by strict codes of conduct and ritual purity, living in a beautiful but confined world, forever separated from the fertile land and wider community, their existence dedicated to maintaining the very system that walled them in. This intricate society was deeply connected to a spiritual world we can only glimpse through the silent stones they left behind, a world where every action, from governance to meal preparation, was imbued with sacred meaning. The silence of the lagoon at night would have been broken only by the low chant of a priest, within a high-walled enclosure, under the watchful gaze of carved stone deities. He performed rituals meant to bridge the world of the living and the realm of the gods. This was the true heartbeat of Nan Madol, not politics or engineering, but a profound spiritual dimension that served as the ideological glue of the entire Saudeleur state. The dynasty's power was not merely claimed, it was divinely ordained, and the city itself was the physical instrument of that covenant. To understand why thousands labored for generations, we must look beyond tribute and fear to a shared belief system that deified the rulers and positioned them as the essential intermediaries between the people and the forces of nature. The central figure in this spiritual cosmos was Nan Madol, the god of thunder and lightning, a deity of immense power and capricious will. The Saudeleur presented themselves as his chosen representatives on earth, their authority flowing directly from him. This connection was actively cultivated in places like the temple islet of Pohnpei, known as the altar of the thunder god. Here, priests performed elaborate ceremonies to appease Nan Madol, seeking his favor for bountiful harvests, success in conflict, and the continued legitimacy of the ruling dynasty. Ritual was a form of applied science, a necessary technology to control the unpredictable elements of island life. The spiritual landscape was populated by a host of other deities and ancestral spirits, each with their own domain and demands. Architecture was not just functional, it was a conduit for this spiritual power. The entire layout of Nan Madol can be read as a sacred diagram. The straight, purposeful canals may have represented spiritual pathways, channeling ritual energy between the islets of the living and the dead. Specific stones held profound significance. So-called sakau stones, large flat basalt slabs, were central to the preparation and consumption of kava, a ceremonial drink that induced a trance-like state, allowing priests and perhaps the Saudeleur himself to commune with the ancestors. Oral traditions and accounts from early European observers speak of secret, nocturnal ceremonies within the walled compounds, rituals of such potency that they were forbidden to common people. These accounts also reference a ceremonial practice that, from a modern perspective, represents the most solemn and extreme form of spiritual offering, a tradition understood by the community as the ultimate gift to secure divine favor. This spiritual world was not abstract, it was embodied in the very ecology of the city. Legends tell of a sacred eel kept and fed within a special pool in Nan Madol. This creature was seen as a tangible manifestation of a spirit, a living connection to the divine that required care and reverence. Such stories illustrate how the spiritual and the everyday were seamlessly woven together. Every stone placed, every canal dug, was part of a grand ritual act, so this leads us to a reflective question that reshapes our entire understanding of the site. How does this overwhelming spiritual purpose redefine Nan Madol? It transforms it from a mere political capital or an engineering marvel into something far more profound, a machine for communicating with the gods. The city was a colossal antenna built stone by stone to broadcast the prayers of the Saudeleur and receive the blessings of the cosmos. This otherworldly focus, this dedication to an invisible realm, makes the tangible mysteries of the city's construction and abandonment even more compelling, for they are the physical echoes of a spiritual ambition that once moved mountains, or at least made them fly. The first written record of these silent stones comes not from a king or priest, but from a shipwrecked sailor. In the early 1800s, an Irishman named James O'Connell found himself stranded on Pohnpei after his whaling vessel was lost. He lived among the islanders for years, and when he finally returned to the Western world, he brought back tales of a fantastic city of stone built upon the water. His accounts, published in newspapers of the day, were met with disbelief, dismissed as the ramblings of a castaway who had spent too long in the tropical sun. The world was not yet ready to believe in a megalithic Venice hidden in the remote Pacific. That credibility arrived a few decades later with the Russian explorer Fyodor Litk. Sailing on a scientific expedition in 1828, Litk's crew carefully charted the coast and documented the ruins with a more clinical eye. His published reports and sketches were a revelation, offering the first tangible proof to the outside world that O'Connell's wild stories were true. Nan Madol, which Litk called the Venice of the Pacific, was suddenly on the map, a legitimate archaeological mystery waiting to be solved. This moment of contact ignited a new chapter for the ancient city, one defined by fascination, misunderstanding, and often exploitation. In the wake of these explorers came a wave of new visitors, each viewing the ruins through a different lens. Whalers stopped to marvel and to scavenge. Missionaries saw a pagan stronghold to be reclaimed, and colonial administrators arrived with an eye for resources and control. The site became a canvas onto which outsiders projected their own fantasies. Some saw evidence of a sunken continent, a remnant of the mythical land of Lemuria, or a lost tribe of Israel. These romantic but misguided theories, popular in the 19th century, completely obscured the true Pohnpeian narrative, the living oral history that connected the stones to the island's own ancestors. The first person to approach the site with something resembling modern scientific rigor was the German ethnographer Paul Hambruch. In the early 1900s, he spent months on Pohnpei, meticulously mapping the islets, recording local oral histories, and documenting the architectural features. His work was foundational, shifting the conversation from wild speculation to systematic study. Yet even this scholarly attention had a shadow side. The era was marked by a rampant collecting fervor, where artifacts were seen as trophies for distant museums rather than parts of a living cultural heritage. Sacred stones, ceremonial objects, and even human remains were removed from the site, severing physical links to the past and causing deep offense to the Pohnpeian people. This controversial practice represents a painful chapter in the site's modern history, where the thirst for knowledge sometimes overrode respect. So we must pause and ask a reflective question. How did this century of outside interpretation, from sailors' yarn to scholarly thesis, initially distort the true story of Nan Madol? For decades, the Western narrative framed it as a mysterious ruin of a vanished race, a puzzle for foreigners to solve. This perspective often sidelined the continuous Pohnpeian understanding of the site as a sacred, spiritual place intimately connected to their own lineage and identity. The journey from myth to archaeology was necessary, but it came at a cost, creating a divide between the scientific record and the cultural memory that would take generations to bridge. This history of exploration, for all its flaws, did ultimately set the stage for a more collaborative and respectful era of investigation, one that would finally begin to listen to the whispers of the stones and the stories of the people who never forgot them. A fragment of charcoal no larger than a fingernail rested in the archaeologist's sieve. On a sweltering day in the 1980s, this tiny piece of burned wood, sifted from a midden heap of ancient shellfish and broken pottery, held the potential to rewrite time. This meticulous work marked the dawn of a new era for Nan Madol, the shift from speculative exploration to rigorous, modern scientific archaeology. Beginning in earnest in the 1950s, researchers arrived not to collect artifacts, but to collect data, aiming to replace the layers of legend with a solid foundation of verifiable fact. Their most powerful tools were not shovels, but techniques like radiocarbon dating and stratigraphy, methods that could read the story written in the soil itself. Radiocarbon dating measures the slow decay of a radioactive form of carbon in organic materials, providing a clock that stops when a plant or animal dies. Stratigraphy is the simple but profound principle that in an undisturbed site, deeper layers are older than those above them. By carefully excavating and dating material from different depths, archaeologists could finally construct a reliable timeline for when this city rose from the reef. Key research projects led by scholars like William Ayres and Rufino Mauricio applied these methods to the stones and soil of Nan Madol. Their work, synthesizing hundreds of carbon dates from charcoal, coral construction material, and food remains, painted a clearer picture. The main monumental construction phase, they concluded, spanned from around the year 1200 to 1600 AD, aligning remarkably well with the oral histories of the Saudeleur Dynasty's reign. This 400-year window was not a single continuous project, but likely a series of bursts of building activity, expansions and refinements by successive rulers. The in-depth explanation of how this chronology was built is a fascinating puzzle in itself. Charcoal from ancient cooking fires provided direct dates for human activity. The coral rubble used as fill within the islets could be dated to show when those platforms were built. Even the style of pottery fragments, a technique called seriation, showed a clear evolution over time, with older, simpler designs found deeper in the ground. Yet, science also introduced new debates. Some evidence, including very early dates from a few islets, suggests there may have been smaller-scale habitation or ritual use of the reef centuries before the Saudeleur's grand vision, hinting at a long, slow gestation for the idea of a city on the water. An illustrative case study is the dating of the Great Tomb Nandauwas. Samples taken from its core construction materials helped confirm it was built toward the later end of the sequence, a crowning achievement of a mature and powerful dynasty. This scientific timeline is a monumental achievement, but it leads to a reflective question: how does this framework of exact dates reshape, and sometimes gently challenge, the living narratives passed down through generations? Oral history speaks in generations and events, not calendar years. The scientific dates provide an anchor, a chronological backbone that gives scale to the legends of Olasipa and Olasopa and the reign of Isohkelekel. They confirm the epic scale of the endeavor while reminding us that science can tell us when something was built, but it often struggles to explain the deeper why, or to fully account for the human spirit that drove such a feat. For all the clarity brought by carbon dating, the physical stones of Nan Madol still guard operational mysteries that no lab date can easily solve. Standing on the black sand shore, looking across miles of jungle toward the quarries, the scale of the problem becomes physical. You feel its weight in the air. We know where the stones began and where they ended. The vast, silent space between those points remains one of the world's great logistical puzzles. How, without metal, wheels, or draft animals, did a society move 750,000 tons of rock across land and sea to build a city on a reef? Simple answers fail here. This demands a deep dive into the gritty mechanics of the impossible, where archaeology meets physics and oceanography. The most compelling modern hypothesis is known as the coral raft theory. Picture the high tide flooding the mangrove channels that snake inland toward the basalt quarries. At this moment of peak water, teams could maneuver massive outrigger canoes or lash together pontoons of buoyant mangrove wood directly to the quarry face. The prismatic basalt logs, already shaped at the source, would be carefully levered onto these floating platforms. Secured with ropes made from coconut fiber, the megaliths would then become cargo, buoyed by the sea itself. On the outgoing tide, these laden rafts would be guided, pulled, and paddled through the natural waterways, and then across the open lagoon toward the growing city. The canals of Nan Madol itself may have been partially dug to act as final delivery channels, allowing the stones to be floated with precision to their exact construction site. This theory elegantly uses the environment as a tool, transforming the water from an obstacle into a highway, but it only solves the final marine leg of the journey. How did the stones travel from the high volcanic quarries down to the water's edge? Here, the bamboo roller theory comes into play. Experimental archaeologists have demonstrated that large stones can be moved overland on a track of greased wooden rails or on rollers made from felled palm or bamboo logs. Teams using ropes could incrementally shift a multi-ton column, placing new rollers in front as the stone moved forward. It is a slow, arduous, and incredibly coordinated process, but a physically plausible one. The true challenge, as shown in modern replica attempts, is not the initial movement but the control, preventing a colossal stone from gaining catastrophic momentum on a slope. These experiments, while insightful, are small in scale. They prove a method could work for a single stone, but they cannot replicate the generational, industrial-level operation required to build Nan Madol. An in-depth analysis must consider the real-world variables the ancient engineers faced. They worked with the calendar of the tides, planning movements around specific lunar phases to harness the highest waters. They contended with seasonal weather, avoiding the typhoon season when the lagoon would become a turbulent trap. The coordination required speaks to a society with sophisticated project management, likely with specialized guilds of stone movers who passed their refined techniques down through families. An illustrative comparison is often made to the movement of the Moai statues on Rapa Nui or Easter Island. There, oral tradition and archaeology suggest the statues were walked upright in a rocking motion, a method that seems entirely distinct. Yet the core similarity is profound. Both cultures developed a highly specialized, culturally unique solution to a megalithic transport problem, a solution that became an integral part of their technological identity. So we are left with a reflective question that hums with possibility. Could the true answer be a lost combination of methods, a technique so tailored to Pohnpei's specific environment that we have not yet reconstructed it? Perhaps they used a now-rotted technology of levers and frames, or a particular arrangement of ropes that multiplied human force in a way we have not conceived. The mystery of movement is profound, but it is matched stone for stone by a deeper mystery of meaning. Why commit to such a staggering effort in the first place? The night sky over Nan Madol would have been a brilliant, untarnished map. With no light pollution to dim its glory, the Milky Way stretched like a luminous river, and the constellations stood out with a clarity we can scarcely imagine today. In that silence, broken only by the lap of water against stone, it is almost impossible to believe the ancient priests and sky watchers did not look upward for meaning. weaving the movements of the heavens into the very fabric of their city. This leads us to a speculative but deeply compelling frontier of the mystery. Does the geometry of Nan Madol hold intentional alignments to the sun, moon, or stars? For ancient cultures worldwide, such celestial connections were far more than spectacle. They were a practical and spiritual necessity. Alignments served as a living calendar, marking the solstices and equinoxes to time planting and harvest cycles. They anchored complex ritual schedules, and for a dynasty claiming divine mandate, linking a capital to the cosmos was the ultimate statement of legitimacy, a way to demonstrate that earthly power mirrored the eternal order above. Researchers like William S. Ayres have studied the site with this question in mind, noting that the orientation of certain major walls and canals seems to correspond roughly to the rising point of the sun at the summer solstice. Other observers have pointed to the eastern alignment of key structures, potentially tracking the heliacal rising of the Pleiades star cluster, an event of immense importance for many Pacific cultures as it heralded the new year and the navigational season. The in-depth exploration of these possibilities requires both wonder and scientific caution. Modern archaeoastronomers approach sites like Nan Madol with a rigorous methodology, carefully measuring sightlines and calculating celestial positions as they would have appeared centuries ago. They must distinguish between an intentional alignment and a coincidence born of topography or other practical building concerns. The evidence at Nan Madol so far remains suggestive rather than conclusive. The city's primary layout seems more dictated by the natural shape of the reef and the need for efficient canal traffic than by a grand celestial blueprint. Yet, within that framework, specific islets or solitary standing stones might still hold individual alignments waiting to be decoded. To understand why this possibility feels so resonant, we look to the broader Pacific context. Astronomy was the bedrock of Oceania's greatest achievement, open ocean wayfinding. Polynesian and Micronesian navigators memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, using them as celestial compass points to voyage across thousands of miles of open sea. This profound sky knowledge was not separate from culture, it was central to it. An illustrative comparison can be made to the Polynesian marae, sacred ceremonial platforms. Many of these structures have clear eastern alignments for ritual purposes, creating a stage where the first rays of the sun would illuminate ceremonies. If even a few of Nan Madol's structures were deliberately oriented, they would connect the city to this vast, shared tradition of reading the sky. This leads to a reflective question that adds a new layer to our understanding of Saudeleur authority. If celestial alignments do exist at Nan Madol, what did they signify? Beyond practical calendrical functions, they would have served as a powerful tool of control. By monopolizing the observation of the sky, the priesthood could claim to be the sole interpreters of the god's celestial language. The timing of a ritual, the announcement of a festival, the very rhythm of life could be dictated from the temple islets, framed not as human decree but as cosmic law. It would reinforce the idea that the ruler's power was woven into the movement of the stars themselves, an authority as fixed and predictable as the rising of the Pleiades. While the stones have not yet yielded definitive proof of this celestial conversation, the very speculation changes how we see the city. It transforms it from a static arrangement of walls into a potential instrument, one that may have measured not just space but time, aligning the brief reign of kings with the infinite cycles of the cosmos. Beyond the stars, the city's very name whispers of deeper spaces. The name itself is the final key to the mystery. In the Pohnpeian language, Nan Madol does not mean city of stone or place of power. It translates directly to spaces between, or more poetically, the intervals. This is not a casual label, it is a profound architectural and spiritual thesis. The identity of this place is not rooted in the solid ground of its 92 islets, but in the shimmering, fluid channels that separate them. To understand this is to see the entire city anew. It was conceived not as a collection of structures, but as a dynamic network, a web of pathways where movement and connection were the central design principles. The emptiness was intentional, the negative space was the defining feature. This concept of the space between resonates on every level. Physically, the canals were the streets, the highways for canoes carrying everything from tribute to priests. Socially, they enforced a powerful separation, a liquid moat that isolated the sacred elite from the common world. Yet spiritually, they represented something more fluid, a permeable boundary. In many Pacific cosmologies, the world is not divided into rigid compartments, but understood as a series of interpenetrating realms. The space between is the zone of encounter, the place where the human world touches the divine, where the living might commune with the ancestors. Nan Madol, by its very name, declares itself to be that intermediary zone. Linguistic and cultural analysis reveals how this idea shaped the city's function. The great ceremonies were not static events confined to a single temple. They were likely processions, ritual journeys that moved through these canals from one islet to another, enacting a symbolic passage through different states of being. The city was a machine for mediation, with the Saudeleur and his priests acting as the operators. They stood in the space between the people and the gods, channeling prayers upward and distributing divine favor downward, all facilitated by this aquatic landscape they had built. An illustrative metaphor helps make this abstract idea tangible. Think of Nan Madol not as a fortress, but as a circuit board. The solid islets are like the components, each with a specialized function, a temple, a tomb, a residence. But the power, the spiritual and political current that animated the entire system, flowed through the canals, the conductive channels etched into the coral. Without those spaces between, the components are just isolated stones. With them, the city becomes a functioning whole, a processor of cosmic and social energy. This leads to a reflective question that redefines our entire perspective. What if we have been looking at Nan Madol all wrong? We focus on the weight of the stones, the height of the walls. But what if the true genius, the core innovation, was the creation of the voids? The emptiness of the canals was not leftover space, it was the purpose. It was the medium through which power, both sacred and temporal, was transmitted and controlled. This conceptual framework of a city designed around intervals and connections makes its comparison to other world wonders not just inevitable, but deeply revealing. A solitary pin on a map of the Pacific connects to threads spanning the globe. To truly grasp the wonder of Nan Madol, we must momentarily zoom out, placing it on that vast canvas of human achievement we call the ancient world. This is not about searching for a shared architect or a sunken continent, but about practicing a kind of comparative awe. By holding Nan Madol beside other legendary sites, we see not copies, but brilliant variations on a universal human theme, the drive to reshape the world in the image of our beliefs and ambitions. Comparative archaeology allows us to ask better questions. Instead of, is this like that, we ask, why did this society solve its problem in this unique way? The answers highlight the breathtaking specificity of human ingenuity. Consider the foundational challenge, building a city on water. Our minds might leap to Venice, a medieval marvel of canals on wooden pilings driven into clay and silt. Or to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital built on an island in Lake Texcoco, with causeways and floating gardens called chinampas. Nan Madol shares the aquatic stage, but its script is entirely different. Venice and Tenochtitlan modified existing landforms in densely populated regions with access to continental resources. Nan Madol's builders created the land itself, from coral and basalt, on the edge of the world's greatest ocean. The comparison does not diminish any of them, it throws their distinct genius into sharp relief. One adapted to a lagoon, another to a lake, but the Saudeleur conjured their foundations from a living reef. Then there is the stone. The megalithic impulse is a global phenomenon. The sarsen stones of Stonehenge were dragged over 20 miles. The moai of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, were walked upright for miles from their quarries. These feats rightfully stun us, yet at Nan Madol the challenge was compounded exponentially. It was not about moving a few dozen or even a few hundred monuments to a sacred plain. It was about moving enough stone to manufacture an entire urban landscape, and then placing that stone not on solid earth, but onto a dynamic, aqueous platform. The moai stand as silent sentinels on dry land. The basalt logs of Nan Madol are the very fabric of a city, perpetually kissed by salt water. The difference is one of category, from monumental sculpture to monumental infrastructure. The creation of artificial islands finds echoes elsewhere. The Euros people of Lake Titicaca still build and rebuild floating islands from totora reeds. The Aztec chinampas were anchored garden plots. These are brilliant adaptations for subsistence and habitation. Nan Madol's islets, however, were not for farming or simple living. They were for concentrated power and profound ceremony. They were permanent, unmovable statements in stone, designed to last for eternity, not seasons. Historians like Jared Diamond have explored how island environments impose strict constraints, limiting resources and contact, which can spur incredible innovation within a tight frame. Nan Madol is the ultimate expression of this, an island society turning its very limitations, the reef and the volcanic stone, into the ingredients for a capital. They look not outward to the horizon for inspiration, but inward, mastering their tiny universe with obsessive depth. This brings us to a crucial point, the dismissal of fantastical myths. The site's isolation and grandeur have long fueled diffusionist theories, tales of lost continents or wandering Egyptians. Comparative study dismantles these neatly. The precise quarrying of prismatic basalt is a local geological story. The Coral Reef engineering is a hyper-local environmental response. The stylistic patterns bear no resemblance to Egyptian or Mesoamerican forms. An illustrative case study lies in voyaging technology. Polynesian navigators possessed the supreme skill of crossing thousands of ocean miles in canoes, a technology of connection. The builders of Nan Madol, likely descendants of such voyagers, applied an equally sophisticated skill set to a technology of place, using their deep knowledge of currents, tides, and materials not to travel, but to root themselves with unprecedented permanence. They channeled the voyaging spirit into a monument of settlement. So what does this web of global comparisons ultimately reveal? It tells us that Nan Madol's true marvel is its unique combination. No other site on Earth combines this scale of artificial reef construction with this method of megalithic basalt assembly under conditions of such extreme oceanic isolation. It is a singular recipe. This realization leads us to a reflective question with profound implications for how we understand our shared human story. If cultures across the globe with no contact all felt the urge to move mountains and reshape waters, what does that say about us? It suggests that the impulse to build the impossible is not borrowed, but innate, a fundamental thread in the human spirit that weaves itself into wildly different patterns depending on the environment, beliefs, and resources at hand. Nan Madol is not a derivative work, it is a masterpiece in its own right, composed in the language of coral and basalt. Recognizing its unique voice also makes its present, fragile state all the more urgent to hear. A low, grinding groan echoes through the lagoon, followed by a thunderous splash as another section of wall surrenders to the water. The sound is not of construction, but of decay. This is the sobering reality of Nan Madol today, a place that survived dynastic collapse and centuries of jungle reclaiming stone, yet now faces a more diffuse and complex set of enemies. In 2016, UNESCO made a difficult but necessary declaration, adding Nan Madol to the World Heritage in Danger list. This was not a mark of failure, but a global alarm bell, a formal recognition that this wonder requires urgent, coordinated action to survive. The threats are a slow-motion siege coming from both the natural world and our own. The most visible assailant is the mangrove tree. What seems like a peaceful, green encroachment is in fact a powerful geological force. These hardy trees seek out the smallest crack in the ancient basalt, sending roots deep into the masonry. As the roots thicken, they act like hydraulic jacks, slowly but inexorably prying the massive stones apart. It is a silent, relentless process, turning solid walls into unstable piles. Meanwhile, the very element the city was built upon, the sea, has become a greater adversary. Climate change is no abstract concept here. Rising sea levels and more frequent, intense storm surges push against the fragile coral foundations and submerged seawalls with increased force, accelerating erosion that once took centuries. The threat is not only saltwater but freshwater as well. Upstream development on the main island of Pohnpei, including road construction and farming, has increased soil runoff. This silt washes down rivers and into the lagoon, where it slowly chokes the life out of Nan Madol's defining feature, its canals. These waterways, the spaces between that gave the city its name and its function, are filling with mud, disrupting the tidal flow that once kept the system healthy and making access for study and preservation more difficult. Human curiosity presents another layer of challenge. While tourism brings vital awareness and economic support, unmanaged foot traffic can wear down ancient surfaces. Past incidents of unauthorized digging or the removal of artifacts, though now far less common under vigilant oversight, represent a theft of cultural memory, a breaking of the physical link to the past. Against this array of challenges, a dedicated coalition is fighting back. Preservation is a painstaking, stone-by-stone endeavor. Pohnpeian State Historic Preservation Officers work in partnership with international experts from the U.S. National Park Service under a special compact and with guidance and funding from UNESCO. Their work is a blend of archaeology, engineering, and profound respect. An illustrative example is the ongoing effort to stabilize the Great Perimeter Seawall, Dorong. Teams carefully document each dislodged basalt boulder, sometimes using sonar to locate them in the murky water, before meticulously returning them to their original positions, reinforcing the structure just as the ancient builders did, but now with the goal of defensive holding. The philosophy is one of minimal intervention to conserve, not reconstruct, allowing the authentic fabric of the site to speak for itself while ensuring it remains standing to speak at all. This monumental effort leads to a reflective question that hangs over every conservation meeting and every carefully placed stone. Can this ancient feat of engineering, which so brilliantly defied the sea for centuries, ultimately survive the age of humans? The answer hinges on recognizing that preservation is no longer just about fighting nature, but about managing our own impact. It is a global responsibility to protect a local masterpiece, ensuring that the spaces between the stones continue to tell their story for generations yet to come. That story, however, is not locked in the past. It is a living, evolving narrative shaped by those who call Pohnpei home. The stones are silent, but the people are not. For the Pohnpeian community today, Nan Madol is far more than a collection of ancient ruins. It is a living ancestor, a presence woven into the fabric of their identity. While the political power of the Saudeleur Dynasty vanished centuries ago, the cultural and spiritual resonance of that place has never faded. It exists in a powerful duality, a source of immense pride and a repository of solemn cautionary tales, reminding everyone of the consequences of overreach and the enduring strength of tradition. This is not a history confined to books. It is a story told in the sway of a dancer's hips, in the cadence of an elder's chant, and in the respectful hush that falls over a group approaching the sacred canals. In modern Pohnpei, Nan Madol functions as a cornerstone of cultural memory. Oral histories passed from generation to generation keep the narratives of Olasipa, Olasopa, and Isohkelekel vibrant and immediate. These are not simply tales of the distant past, they are foundational lessons. The story of the Saudeleur's fall, for instance, is often recounted to teach the values of humility, fair leadership, and the dangers of isolating oneself from the community. Traditional dances performed at festivals and community gatherings physically embody these stories. Dancers might portray the flying stones, the arrival of the warrior hero, or the solemn rituals of the priests, making the epic tangible for every new generation. For a young Pohnpeian, learning these dances is not just an artistic pursuit, it is a way of memorizing their heritage, of internalizing the moral framework of their society. The management of the site itself reflects this deep cultural integration. Nan Madol is not overseen by a distant government agency alone, but by a council of traditional chiefs, the Nonwalki and Nonkan of Madol municipality. This governance structure ensures that decisions about preservation, access, and tourism are made with direct input from the very lineage holders and cultural authorities for whom the site holds profound spiritual meaning. Their perspective is essential, for they navigate a delicate balance, the desire to share this global wonder with the world, and the imperative to protect its sacred integrity. Community-based tourism initiatives are growing, often led by local guides who are themselves deeply connected to the stories. These guides do not just recite dates, they share the legends, point out features tied to specific spirits, and explain the traditional protocols that still govern behavior within the ruins. This leads to a practice that might seem unexpected to an outside visitor, the act of asking permission. For many Pohnpeians, especially those from the surrounding communities, Nan Madol remains a place inhabited by potent spiritual energy. It is considered respectful and often necessary to perform a brief, quiet ceremony or offer a few words of respect before entering, acknowledging the ancestors and spirits who reside there. An illustrative anecdote tells of a film crew wishing to document the site at dawn. Before setting up their equipment, they were advised by a local elder to simply state their peaceful intentions aloud to the quiet lagoon. This is not seen as superstition, but as a form of cultural etiquette, a way of maintaining a relationship with a place that is still very much alive in the spiritual landscape. So we must ask, how does this living, breathing cultural connection fundamentally transform our understanding of Nan Madol? It moves the site from the category of a static archaeological puzzle, a problem for outsiders to solve, into the realm of a continuing ancestor. It is a teacher, a guardian of values, and a permanent member of the community's spiritual family. This vibrant legacy inevitably spills into modern media, where Nan Madol is sometimes featured in documentaries, video games, and novels. These portrayals can spark global fascination, bringing welcome attention and resources. Yet, they also risk simplifying or sensationalizing a deeply nuanced cultural treasure into a backdrop for adventure or mystery. For the Pohnpeian people, the true story is richer and more enduring, written not in speculative fiction, but in the respectful footsteps of their children walking where their ancestors built, ensuring the spaces between the stones are filled not with silence but with meaning. The name Arlaye evokes a dread deeper than any ocean trench. In his 1928 story, The Call of Cthulhu, horror author H.P. Lovecraft described a nightmarish city of non-Euclidean geometry, a sunken metropolis of greenish stone where the great old one slumbered. Scholars of his work have long identified its inspiration, the remote, water-bound ruins of Nan Madol. Lovecraft simply lifted the entire concept, renamed it, and submerged it, transforming a real place of human achievement into a fictional seat of cosmic horror. This act of literary appropriation marked the moment Nan Madol ceased to be solely an archaeological site and became a pop culture archetype, a ready-made template for the ancient, the sunken, and the utterly alien. Its infiltration into the global imagination is now pervasive, shaping perceptions in ways that often completely overshadow its true history. After Lovecraft, the aesthetic stuck. The image of cyclopean stone blocks, slick with seawater and shrouded in mist, proved irresistible for storytellers. It appears in later pulp novels and modern horror as the quintessential lost city. Tabletop role-playing games like Call of Cthulhu codified it as a location for adventures, a place where investigators might confront unspeakable entities. Perhaps most influentially, it surfaced in blockbuster video games. In the Tomb Raider series, Lara Croft navigates its canals, solving puzzles and battling guardians. In the Civilization franchise, it appears as a buildable world wonder, granting cultural bonuses to the player who constructs it. These appearances are a double-edged sword. They generate a thrilling, widespread awareness, introducing millions to the name and the striking visual of a city on the water. The in-depth analysis of this phenomenon reveals a core appeal. Nan Madol's real-world aesthetics are already perfectly genre-coded. The sheer scale of the basalt logs feels inhuman or cyclopean. The waterlogged setting creates an atmosphere of decay and mystery. The isolation suggests that anything could be hidden there. For creators of horror and adventure, it is a gift, a fully formed set piece requiring little embellishment. Yet this very process often involves a problematic exoticism. In many fictional portrayals, the city is empty of its people and stripped of its context. It becomes a mere backdrop, a spooky ruin waiting for Western explorers to discover its secrets, a narrative that uncomfortably echoes the colonial history of actual archaeology. The site is othered, made strange not just by time, but by a framing that divorces it from the sophisticated culture that built it. An illustrative example is the evolution of the sunken city trope itself. While myths of lost lands like Atlantis predate Nan Madol's discovery by the West, the specific imagery of a geometrically arranged stone city emerging from a tropical lagoon is powerfully rooted in the early descriptions and sketches of the real ruins. This visual, filtered through Lovecraft and his successors, has now circled the globe, a fictional echo of a real place. So we must pause and ask a reflective question with real stakes for preservation. Does this booming fictional fame ultimately help the real Nan Madol by fueling public interest and tourism? Or does it permanently distort its truth, locking it in the global mind as a set piece for fantasy rather than a testament to human ingenuity? The answer is likely a complex mix of both. The pop culture version acts as a potent lure, drawing people to learn that the place is real. But separating that compelling fiction from the even more compelling facts requires us to examine the most outlandish claims ever made about these stones. A YouTube video thumbnail glows with a title in bold yellow letters, "Proof of Atlantis Finally Found." It is a familiar digital ghost, one of countless claims that swirl around the silent stones of Nan Madol, attaching them to a fictional past they never inhabited. This is the persistent noise we must now quiet to finally hear the true story. The sensational theories are seductive, a cascade of lost continents, ancient astronauts, and vanished super races. They proclaim the city is too old, too precise, too impossible to be the work of the islanders themselves. But each of these claims, when held up to the light of evidence, dissolves like mist over the lagoon, revealing not a deeper mystery, but a profound failure of imagination on our own part. Why do these myths cling so tenaciously to a place with such a well-documented human history? Their origins are often traced not to the reef, but to the colonial attitudes of the 19th century. When European explorers first encountered monumental ruins built by non-white cultures, from the Great Zimbabwe in Africa to the pyramids of the Maya, a prevailing racist ideology could not accept that these primitive people were capable of such feats. The ruins had to be the work of a lost white civilization, a sunken continent like Atlantis or Lemuria, or some other external, superior force. This thinking directly birthed the myth of the lost continent of Mu, a Pacific analogue to Atlantis popularized by the amateur archaeologist James Churchward in the 1920s, a work of speculative fiction presented as fact. This framework robbed indigenous peoples of their own intellectual heritage, a theft of legacy that echoes painfully to this day. So let us dismantle these myths, not with anger, but with the clear, cool weight of fact. First, the stones themselves. A common claim is that the basalt columns are cut with laser-like precision, proof of advanced technology. The truth is more marvelous. These are prismatic basalt columns, a natural geological formation. When thick lava flows cool slowly, they contract and crack into these spectacular hexagonal or pentagonal pillars, as seen at the Giant's Causeway in Ireland or Devil's Postpile in California. The ancient builders of Nan Madol were brilliant geologists. They did not invent these shapes, they recognized them in the landscape and harnessed their structural perfection. They quarried them along natural fracture lines, a sophisticated but entirely human application of observation and stone-on-stone technique. Second, the timeline. Pseudoscientific narratives often push the city's age back tens of thousands of years, placing it in a mythical golden age. Modern radiocarbon dating provides an unequivocal answer. The vast majority of construction activity falls between the years 1200 and 1600 AD, a medieval period in Europe, contemporaneous with the Khmer Empire at Angkor Wat and the great kingdoms of West Africa. This is not a relic from a forgotten epoch, but a peer to other flowering human civilizations around the globe. Third, the impossibility of construction. The argument that the stones are too heavy to move without alien technology or supernatural aid is an insult to human ingenuity. As we explored earlier, experimental archaeology and environmental logic point to entirely plausible methods using rafts, rollers, ropes, and tidal leverage. The construction was a monumental, generations-long project, but not a magical one. It stands as a testament to organized labor, sophisticated project management, and a deep, generational commitment to a vision. Archaeologists like Dr. Rufino Mauricio, a Pohnpeian scholar himself, emphasize that the real wonder is the localized innovation. The Saudeleur and their people developed a unique architectural language in response to their specific environment, an engineering philosophy born of the reef, the rock, and the ocean. To attribute this to aliens or Atlanteans is to ignore the breathtaking adaptability and intelligence of the culture that lived there. The social harm of these persistent myths is real and ongoing. They perpetuate a narrative that disconnects the Pohnpeian people from their most iconic heritage site. It tells the world, and more damagingly, it can tell Pohnpeian youth, that their ancestors could not have been the authors of such grandeur, that they must have had help from somewhere else, someone else. It is a quiet erosion of cultural pride. An illustrative case is the very name Lemuria. This was a hypothetical land bridge proposed by a scientist in the 1860s to explain lemur fossils, a theory quickly discarded by geology. Yet it was seized upon by mystics and fiction writers, transformed into a Pacific utopia, and grafted onto sites like Nan Madol. The chain is clear, from a debunked scientific guess to romantic fiction to a modern internet fact. This leads us to the reflective heart of the matter. Why does our culture, even now, seem so eager to credit lost white races or extraterrestrial visitors for Nan Madol, rather than the Polynesian and Micronesian ancestors who actually built it? Perhaps it is easier to fantasize about a technologically advanced other than to sit with the humbling reality of human potential, to acknowledge that people we once considered primitive were, in fact, master engineers of their world. Letting go of the sensational myths is not a loss of wonder, it is an upgrade. It replaces a cheap, generic fantasy with a specific, human story of brilliance, ambition, and ultimate consequence. It allows the true technological insights of the Saudeleur to shine, not as a mystery to be solved by outsiders, but as a legacy to be honored by all. The black stones of Nan Madol are a library written in a language of engineering. To move beyond the mystery, we must learn to read them not for what they lack, but for what they reveal. This is not a story of missing technology, but of a different technological philosophy altogether, a unique style forged by isolation and necessity. The Saudeleur did not have the wheel, metal, or beasts of burden. What they possessed was a profound, generational intimacy with their environment, an expertise they leveraged to perform a miracle of logistics. Their approach teaches us that innovation is not always about inventing new tools, but about achieving a masterful fluency with the tools you already have. This is the concept of a technological style, a culture's signature way of solving problems, and at Nan Madol, that signature is written in coral and basalt. Every choice they made was a lesson in sustainable, large-scale construction within an incredibly fragile ecosystem. Consider the foundation itself. They used coral rubble, a material that seems chaotic and weak. But this was a deliberate, brilliant selection. Coral rubble is lightweight compared to volcanic stone, reducing the load on the unstable reef. More importantly, it is porous, allowing seawater to drain through it freely rather than building up hydrostatic pressure that would burst their retaining walls apart. They were not just dumping rock, they were creating a permeable, living foundation that could breathe with the tides. Their understanding of tidal hydrology was another form of silent engineering. The entire canal grid was not just for transportation, it was a managed circulatory system. By carefully placing openings and potentially using wooden gates, they could control the flow, flushing out stagnant water, preventing the buildup of silt, and perhaps even creating controlled currents. Some researchers speculate these currents could have been harnessed to help maneuver the heavy basalt rafts during construction, using the moon's own gravitational pull as an engine. This is ethno-engineering, a deep, practical science born from centuries of observation and refined through trial and error, passed down not in textbooks but in practice. The stonework itself is a masterclass in working with nature's own geometry. They did not carve these perfect columns from solid rock, they quarried them. They sought out the natural prismatic basalt formations, those incredible hexagonal and pentagonal pillars created by cooling lava, and they learned to separate them along their existing fracture lines. This selective quarrying minimized the immense labor of shaping, allowing them to use the stones almost as they found them, like pre-cut timber from a cosmic forest. Each log was a gift from the volcano, recognized and utilized by a people who saw the potential in the landscape itself. This technological style connects directly to the broader genius of Polynesian and Micronesian tradition. The same people who could navigate thousands of ocean miles by reading stars, waves, and bird flights applied that same meticulous observational skill to a stationary problem. The voyager's mind, which could sense unseen islands over the horizon, was turned inward to sense the stresses on a coral foundation or the path of a tidal current through a canal. Building Nan Madol required the same systemic thinking, patience, and deep environmental literacy as a multi-year voyage across the Pacific. So we arrive at a reflective question with urgent modern relevance. In our age of concrete and steel, facing rising seas and fragile ecosystems, what profound lessons does Nan Madol offer about building with nature rather than against it? This ancient city is a case study in biomimicry and adaptive resilience crafted a millennium ago. It shows that monumental legacy is not dependent on consuming resources, but on understanding them. The future of the site now hinges on a poignant reversal, applying our most advanced technologies from sonar mapping to climate modeling, not to outdo the ancient builders, but to preserve their timeless lesson in harmony. The quiet hum of a drone is the newest sound over the ancient lagoon. Flying a precise, automated grid, its sensors capture millions of data points with each pass, painting the crumbling islets not with brushstrokes but with laser light. This is the frontier of preservation, where cutting-edge technology meets the task of saving the past. For a site as fragile and remote as Nan Madol, digital tools like three-dimensional laser scanning, known as LiDAR, photogrammetry, and underwater sonar mapping are no longer optional, they are essential. They allow us to create a perfect digital twin, an archive so precise it can record the texture of a single stone, the exact lean of a wall, or the pattern of coral growth at a specific point in time. The significance of this goes far beyond creating a high-tech snapshot. These digital archives become a permanent, detailed record against the inevitable forces of loss, a backup copy of history stored in the cloud, safeguarding the site's geometry for future generations even if the physical stones shift or fall. Organizations like SciArc and academic teams from institutions such as the University of Oregon have undertaken comprehensive projects to scan the entire complex. They use ground-based laser scanners that sweep across the islets, capturing every surface, while aerial drones photograph the site from every angle. Underwater, sonar units map the submerged seawalls and foundations, revealing structures hidden by centuries of silt and murky water. All this data is then fused into an incredibly detailed, navigable three-dimensional model. The in-depth exploration of this data unlocks possibilities that were once science fiction. Researchers can now analyze the site in ways that would be impossible or even dangerous on the ground. They can measure subsidence, the slow sinking of an islet, to the millimeter by comparing scans taken years apart. They can run structural stress simulations to see which walls are most vulnerable. The laser's eye can even detect faint tool marks or construction guidelines on the basalt, inscriptions left by the builders themselves that have been worn smooth to the human eye over centuries. One illustrative example comes from a recent stabilization effort. Before workers moved a single stone to reinforce a collapsing section of wall, engineers first scanned the entire area. They used the digital model to plan the exact sequence of the repair, identifying key load-bearing stones and testing different reinforcement strategies in the virtual space before any physical intervention began. This minimized risk to both the workers and the original fabric of the site. Beyond pure preservation science, this technology also opens new doors for public engagement. These detailed models are the foundation for immersive virtual reality experiences. Imagine someone on the other side of the world being able to stand in the central courtyard of Nandauwas, to look up at its towering walls, or to pilot a virtual canoe through the silent canals. This kind of access allows for profound educational connection without a single footstep impacting the fragile coral or adding stress to the ancient masonry. It democratizes wonder, yet this incredible capability leads to a reflective question that sits at the intersection of technology and spirit. In creating a perfect, immutable digital replica, are we preserving the site's living soul or just capturing its silent, static shadow? The digital twin holds the shape, the measurement, the fact, but can it hold the feeling of salt spray on your skin, the weight of the humidity, the profound silence that is not an absence of sound, but a presence of time? The virtual model is a vital tool for preservation and study, but it is a map, not the territory. The territory itself, the physical place with all its challenges, remains the ultimate destination for those who make the journey. The gentle knock of a wooden paddle against the hull is the only sound as your outrigger canoe slips into the first canal. A wall of black basalt rises beside you, draped in emerald vines, and the air is thick with the scent of salt and damp earth. You have arrived at Nan Madol not as a conqueror or an explorer, but as a guest. This moment carries a profound responsibility, for you are entering a place that is simultaneously an archaeological wonder, a fragile ecosystem, and a living ancestor to the people of Pohnpei. Visiting here is a privilege that demands a specific kind of awareness, a blend of practical preparation and deep cultural respect. This is not a typical tourist destination. It is an act of pilgrimage to a site still healing from centuries of attention. Your journey begins in Colonia, the main town on Pohnpei. From there, a drive along coastal roads brings you to the small village that serves as the gateway to the ruins. Here, the first and most important rule is established: you must hire a local guide. This is often mandatory, and for excellent reason. These guides are not just narrators, they are cultural interpreters and guardians. Many come from families with deep ties to the area, and they hold the oral histories, the proper protocols, and the safety knowledge that no guidebook can provide. They understand which islets are stable enough to walk on, and which are too sacred or too dangerous to approach. The best time to visit is during a lower tide, when more of the foundational structures are visible and boat access is easier, and ideally during the drier months to avoid the full force of tropical downpours that can make the stone paths treacherously slick. The experience itself is a full sensory immersion in humility. The boat ride across the lagoon can be choppy, a reminder of the aquatic challenge the builders faced. Disembarking, you step onto uneven stones worn smooth by time and tide. You will walk in humid, dappled light, the jungle pressing in from all sides. Your guide will lead you along narrow paths, pointing out the function of different islets, the engineering of the walls, and sharing the names and stories passed down through generations. You will see areas cordoned off where walls have succumbed to mangroves or where the ground is unstable. These off-limit zones are to be respected without question. They are protected for your safety and for the site's preservation. Your behavior within these sacred spaces is the cornerstone of ethical travel. This is an active preservation site, not a playground. You must never climb on the walls. The pressure of feet and hands accelerates the erosion of mortarless joints that have held for centuries. Do not remove anything, not a piece of coral, not a small stone, not a shell. Every fragment is part of the site's integrity. Follow your guide's instructions precisely, especially regarding where to step and where to pause. Observe a quiet respect. This is not a place for loud voices or boisterous behavior. The atmosphere is one of reverence, and your conduct should contribute to that peace. One transformative anecdote comes from a traveler who recalled their guide pausing at the entrance to a ceremonial islet. Instead of rushing in, the guide offered a few soft words in Pohnpeian, a simple acknowledgement to the spirits of the place. That small, respectful act framed the entire visit, shifting it from a sightseeing tour to a shared moment of cultural understanding. So as you stand in the shadow of Nandauwas or look down a silent, green canal, ask yourself this reflective question: what is your role here? Are you merely an observer, a student of history, or something closer to a pilgrim? The most ethical answer is that you are a witness. Your role is to see, to listen, and to learn with humility. You are part of a continuum of attention that stretches back to the Saudeleur and forward to future generations of Pohnpeians. By visiting with respect, by supporting the local community through your guide fees, and by carrying the true story of this place home with you, you become part of the solution. You help ensure that the story of the spaces between does not end with the stones, but continues in the mindful footsteps of those who come to listen. That archaeologist's trowel pauses, its shadow falling on a patch of earth that has felt no human touch for 8 centuries. This is the quiet frontier of Nan Madol's story, the line between what we know and all that remains hidden beneath the mangrove roots and lagoon silt. For every mystery solved by carbon dating or laser scanning, a deeper, more nuanced question emerges, pulling us further into the narrative. The city is far from fully decoded. Vast portions of its 92 islets lie untouched by systematic excavation, their stories locked in soil and coral. The future of research here is not about finding a single lost treasure, but about patiently assembling a mosaic of understanding, one tiny fragment at a time. The unanswered questions form a compelling agenda for the next generation of explorers. First, the precise chronology of construction remains a puzzle. We have a broad 400-year window for the city's rise, but what was the exact sequence? Which islet was built first, and how did the urban plan evolve from a simple chiefly enclosure to a sprawling megalithic capital? The answer lies in meticulously comparing soil layers and construction styles across the entire site, a task of immense scale. Second, we have only glimpsed the full extent of the infrastructure. Advanced sonar suggests that the submerged seawalls and canal foundations are more extensive than what is visible at low tide. What engineering feats lie completely underwater, hidden by centuries of sediment? Third, the economic engine of the Saudeleur state is still poorly understood. While we know of the tribute system from oral histories, what tangible evidence exists of trade networks beyond Pohnpei? Did canoes arrive from Kosrae, the Marshall Islands, or even further, bringing exotic goods or ideas that influenced Nan Madol's development? Finding a single distinctive pottery, sherd, or stone tool from afar could redraw the map of medieval Pacific exchange. Perhaps the most intimate questions concern the people themselves. Beyond the grand walls, what was daily life truly like for the inhabitants? Detailed paleodietary analysis, studying microscopic residues on cooking pots and examining ancient food waste middens, can reveal their exact meals, showing how they balanced imported taro with lagoon fish and shellfish. Furthermore, respectful scientific study of burial sites, should the community permit it, could use emerging techniques like ancient DNA analysis. This would not be about individuals, but about understanding broad patterns of health, ancestry, and movement. It could reveal genetic connections across the Pacific, tracing the voyaging lineages that culminated in this settled, monumental phase of island culture. Another promising technique is sediment coring in the canals. By extracting long cylinders of accumulated muck, scientists can read them like tree rings, uncovering centuries of environmental data, pollen from cultivated plants, and evidence of how the inhabitants managed their delicate aquatic ecosystem. This future research points toward a powerful synthesis, a collaborative model where Pohnpeian traditional knowledge is not a secondary source, but a primary guide for high-tech science. Imagine a project where elders' stories about specific islets inform where archaeologists choose to excavate, or where legends about ceremonial practices help interpret the function of a puzzling structure. This partnership respects the site as both a scientific archive and a living cultural landscape. An illustrative possibility lies in the waterlogged layers of the site. In the oxygen-poor mud beneath the water table, organic materials that normally decay, wood, textiles, food remains, even seeds, can be preserved for centuries. A carefully excavated trench in such an area could yield a time capsule of everyday life, a tangible connection to the people who walked these canals that no stone alone can provide. So we must ask, as the trowel prepares to turn that first scoop of untouched earth, what ultimate truth about human ambition and adaptation might Nan Madol still reveal? Its final lesson may be about resilience and consequence, not as abstract ideas, but as physical laws written in coral and basalt. Each new discovery will add a sentence to a story we are only beginning to read, a story that challenges our assumptions about isolation, innovation, and the timeless human desire to build something meant to last forever, even on a foundation that forever shifts with the tide. The sun sets and the black stones seem to drink the light, glowing with a deep, ember-like warmth as the lagoon falls still. In this quiet hour, Nan Madol transforms once more. It ceases to be merely a historical site or an engineering puzzle, and becomes something far more universal, a mirror held up to humanity itself. Within its geometric canals and silent walls, we see reflected not just the story of the Saudeleur, but the fundamental drives that have shaped civilizations across time and space. This city on the water is a microcosm, a complete and poignant cycle of human ambition played out on a single reef. It begins with that most basic impulse, the urge to build, to impose order upon chaos. From the pyramids of Giza to the skyscrapers of modern cities, we are a species that marks its presence with monuments. The Saudeleur took this drive to a breathtaking extreme, not just erecting a temple, but manufacturing the very ground it stood upon. Their act speaks to a deep-seated need to create something permanent, a defiance of our own mortality etched in stone. This leads directly to the second reflection, the quest for connection with something greater. Every civilization constructs its pathways to the divine, whether through soaring cathedrals, silent pyramids, or, as here, a sacred city designed as a machine for ritual. Nan Madol was that conduit, a physical instrument to communicate with the gods of thunder and sea, proving that our search for meaning often becomes the most powerful engine for innovation. Yet, the mirror also shows us the shadows that follow such light. The concentration of power, the centralization of authority that makes such grand projects possible, is vividly displayed in the city's layout. The walls were not merely defensive, they were ideological, separating the sacred elite from the common world in a physical manifestation of social hierarchy. This brings us to the cycle's inevitable turn. The story of Nan Madol is a compressed history of civilization, innovation, zenith, hubris, and collapse. The Saudeleur's genius was in their environmental mastery, but their potential weakness lay in becoming detached from the very land and people that sustained them. Their capital, for all its grandeur, was an isolated heart, and when the rhythm of tribute faltered and a challenger arose, the system proved brittle. The city's abandonment is not a mystery of catastrophe, but a lesson in sustainability. It asks us what happens when a society's most monumental efforts are directed inward, toward sustaining its own elite, rather than outward, toward resilience and integration. Philosophically, Nan Madol stands as a powerful symbol of this duality, of incredible achievement intertwined with poignant loss. It is a testament to what we can accomplish when vision, resources, and collective will align across generations. Simultaneously, it is a memorial to the impermanence of even our greatest works, a reminder that all human orders, no matter how solid they seem, are subject to the tides of change, both social and environmental. An illustrative metaphor captures this essence. Nan Madol is a ship of stone, forever anchored between the volcano that gave it substance and the reef that gives it home, suspended between the solidity of history and the fluidity of myth. It sailed for centuries as the flagship of a dynasty, and now rests as a ghost ship, its hull echoing with the stories of those who built it, ruled from it, and finally walked away from it. This leads to a final, reflective question, one that turns the mirror back upon us. As you look at our own world, at its soaring cities and complex networks, ask yourself, what does your own civilization build its foundations upon? Are they rooted in resilience and reciprocity, or are they, like the coral cribs of Nan Madol, brilliant yet vulnerable, requiring constant maintenance against the rising sea? The stones do not judge, they only reflect, waiting in the quiet lagoon for us to understand the story they have been telling all along. The story of Nan Madol is a conversation held in stone and water, a dialogue between human ambition and the relentless sea that continues to this day. We have navigated its canals of history, from the legendary chants of sorcerer kings to the precise digital maps created by modern laser scanners. The journey reveals a city that defies simple explanation, not because it was built by gods or aliens, but because it represents the breathtaking zenith of a specific human culture working in profound harmony with a specific place. The key takeaways are now clear. Nan Madol stands as a towering testament not to lost continents, but to the brilliant, localized ingenuity of the Saudeleur people. Its true wonder lies in a mastery of the environment so complete that they could envision and execute a capital city upon the living skin of a coral reef. The lingering mysteries of how they moved those 750,000 tons of basalt only deepen our respect, pointing not to a lack of technology, but to a different technological philosophy altogether, one of elegant leverage using tides, ropes, and generational knowledge. We have reflected on its dual nature as a sacred center of spiritual power and a stark symbol of political isolation, a combination that fueled its rise and perhaps seeded its fall. Its story is a complete cycle, a cautionary tale written in coral and basalt about the distance that can grow between rulers and the land that sustains them. Today, the dialogue takes an urgent turn. As our world warms and sea levels rise, as mangrove roots patiently pry apart the ancient masonry, Nan Madol faces threats more diffuse than any invading warrior. Its future is uncertain, making its study, preservation, and respectful understanding more critical than ever. It is no longer just an archaeological site, it is a teacher. In Pohnpeian tradition, the truest places of power are not those that inspire awe alone, but those that teach humility. This city on the water does both. It humbles us with the scale of its construction and grounds us with the reality of its impermanence. It asks us to consider the foundations of our own societies. What are we building today, and upon what ground does it stand? I invite you to reflect on this enigmatic city and the legacies we choose to create. Share your thoughts on Nan Madol in the comments below. What aspect of its story resonated most deeply with you? And if you wish to journey further into the spaces between history and mystery, subscribe to continue exploring with us. Thank you for listening to the Whispers of the Stones.